Hi, everyone. My name is Oonagh Graham, and I was asked to present on navigating school systems and resources for all of you today. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am first and foremost, I was went to university for to become a teacher, and my first degree was in learning disabilities from UVic. And then I moved on to Edmonton, where I taught at a private school for kids with learning disabilities. Um, Things moved on, and I ended up moving to a learning specialist job in a central office. I've also done a year with Alberta Education back in the day. And more recently, I was seconded to Children's Services as Success and School Lead. So I worked with all the school authorities to ensure that, or to work as a team with the schools for children in care. And more recently than that, I joined the amazing team at the Alberta Children's Hospital in the neuromotor clinic as their education liaison to work with the schools that the children were attending and with people at the hospital. And about in October, I left that position and now I'm doing private practice. I'm a psychologist who does assessments for private practice. So that's me. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about your children and the schools. So, navigating schools can be a very tricky situation because not only you're dealing with the most precious person to you, which is your children, but there's all sorts of things that are different in different school systems. So, I'm going to try and give you as much of an overview as I can. And then I will provide my email address will be below for anyone that wants to follow up with me. So, my outline for today is looking first and foremost at therapeutic supports in school, how to access assessments, education and coding criteria in Alberta, which leads to an individualized program plan or a learner support plan, or sometimes there are different terminology within different school divisions. I wanted to touch on early intervention and then to provide you with a few more resources. And like I said, you can contact me if you have any questions. Not all school divisions have all of these resources, but generally, a lot of school divisions, or most, depending on where they are and who they can access, do have speech and language therapists. There's often occupational therapy supports for orientation and mobility, fine and gross motor skills. Some school divisions contract or have physical therapists, a little bit more rare. Services for the blind and visually impaired, services for deaf and hard of hearing. And then there's so a lot of specialty areas and specialists in complex learning and medical needs, behavior, mental health and wellness, and learning disabilities. Because we're in the Calgary region, I've covered the two largest school divisions, Calgary Board of Education and Calgary Catholic School Division. So I just wanted to look at a few of the resources that can be found in Calgary Board of Education and also in Calgary Catholic. And like I say at the bottom there, if you need information, if you're in Rocky View, Foothills, Golden Hills, it's best to contact your local school division and check on their websites because generally they're very descriptive of what services they provide and who to connect with. Okay, so this is one of the websites for Calgary Board of Education. And this is the link that I provided in the PowerPoint. And what it has a nice page here on students with diverse learning needs. Calgary Board is massive. They're one of the largest school divisions in the province, if not the largest. And they have a very good built-in infrastructure to support the children. So it's a continuum of support and services for students with diverse learning needs. There's a specialized team that supports students with their unique learning style and their program planning. The Calgary Board is committed to achieving Alberta's vision for inclusive schools, and the following principles guide them. So that's underneath there. They want to reduce barriers, build capacity, collaborate for success. Within that continuum, it's a starting point of inclusive education, which has many definitions, in my opinion. They would like children to start with their local schools, or register with them, and then the team takes over to determine if there's a need for a specialized classroom or placement. So they do have unique settings within the Calgary Board of Education. There's a process to get in those settings, but that's where you start with your local school. They get in contact with Calgary Board and their specialists and strategists, and they work around those things. So it's a real team approach. Within Calgary Board of Education, there are specialized classes and unique settings also. If a student requires supports and services beyond the community school, the referral, consideration, placement in a special class or unique setting begins with the principal of the community school. So if you're in the Rundle Park area, you would start in Rundle. If you're in Queen Elizabeth area, you start with Queen Elizabeth. So it starts there. And the consideration for placement in a specialized class or unique setting is a collaborative process among parents, principals, teachers, and others. And I didn't include them, but within each of these, if you click on those links, you can find what programming is available with Calgary Board of Education. They have a very nice, supportive classrooms within CBE. The next is Calgary Catholic, the second largest within the city and surrounding area. And they also have specialized programs for kids with diverse learning needs. And it also, again, begins with the school and the school resource team, and they call it the SRT. And it's the primary problem solving vehicle. So they come together as a team and they look at what strategies, what supports can be used for the children and support the children. Um, Support may include consultations, specialized assessment, learner support plans, special education class placement, or access to health related services. The district provides students with diverse learning needs according to Alberta education standards. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you see on the side there, the diverse learning supported programs are cognitive disabilities, complex needs, gifted, emotional and behavioral challenges, and learning enhancement and development. So I just went into I clicked on cognitive disabilities, and these are some of the classes that are within the Calgary Catholic School Division. So there's ES1, ES2, ES3, Connections, Diverse Learning Class, and Observation Class. And if you click on those, you can find out what the specialty is within each of those programs. Usually they're smaller class size, behavior support workers, educational assistants, etc. And some therapeutic supports often are provided for the children within those programs, such as a speech and language or occupational therapy, etc., as needed. So Calgary Catholic also has a very beautiful infrastructure that they work with. Assessment's always a big issue and situation. Some children come to school with assessment, some don't. Some get them through their doctors, some that get them through Child Development Center, Alberta Health Services, primary care units. But let's talk about assessments in schools. So each school division has their own resources for assessments. And when little people start out, usually it's much easier to get things such as speech and language and occupational therapy, especially if you're in program unit funding, which is, beginning at 2.5 or 3 years. But we'll talk more about that later. As students get older, unfortunately, the resources are somewhat less available. And that varies by school division and by the child's need, of course. I'm a true school believer, and I do believe that schools do their very best to meet the needs of all of their children. I've seen some amazing things happen when people put their heads together across ministries, such as health, education, children's services, etc. But like I said, sometimes as students get older, the resources are somewhat less available, and that's where other places have to be accessed. Example, health services, primary care networks, etc. Or sometimes the children do qualify for family support for children with disabilities, and under their mandate, they can often provide supported services depending on the need of speech and language, psychology, occupational therapy, etc. So, if your little person is at school or your older child, and there is deemed a need for further assessment, like for example, a psychoeducational assessment, then the teacher can put your child's name forward for review. Often I've found that school divisions do their very best to assess children. However, and I don't even like saying this, um, there are sometimes limited resources within that area, but a full psychoeducational assessment really does provide a very nice overview of a child's functioning cognitively, behaviorally, social, emotionally, and academically. If you do feel that your child needs an assessment, talk to their teacher. Start with their school. So once a child has been identified with a speech and language disorder or learning disability or learning disorder, what happens then is the school takes the information and they look at what's called the Alberta Education Provincial Coding Criteria. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about that, but there's the link for it. I've attached special ed coding criteria 2024, 2025. Every year they put out a new coding criteria. Now, when I say coding, we don't like to use numbers on children. What this does is it just delineates where certain funds go, where certain supports go, identifies them so that the Alberta Education can keep track of, children that have diverse learning needs within the school systems. It's really important. So this slide just provides an introduction as to why this sort of setup is in Alberta. This framework supports school authorities in determining the amount of additional support required to ensure children and students are successful. So the coding criteria outlines within specific categories to assist teachers and administrators to identify children with diverse learning needs from ECS to grade 12. Then this data goes to Alberta Education and the need for additional supports may be determined. So that's why they do it. This is the table of contents for the special ed coding criteria, and it just breaks down, children that are identified as having mild or moderate needs and students who are identified as having severe needs. So, within each of these, there's a pretty thorough descriptor. So you can check those out. So, oh, if my child has been coded, for example, uh, intellectual disability, the code's 51 considered a mild moderate, but there's other needs within there, i.e., physical medical needs, then it might come under severe. But that's where principals and school divisions determine that. So I think it's a really good resource, and you'll hear that term a lot. And I don't know, sometimes it's just like what code are they? What's the coding criteria? And that's where this is coming from. So I just wanted to introduce that to you. Wouldn't worry too much about that, but you will see it and you'll wonder, what is that? But now you have a resource for that. And then within that document, there's also some other really good resources here. There's the standards for the provision of early childhood services, special education standards, other resources. And so I just included that slide for you if you want to just dig a little deeper into there. Alberta Education has tremendous amount of fantastic resources on their websites. A lot of the resources that I've actually added here are older resources, as you'll note, but they are tried and true and still used to this day. So once your child has been identified as having a diverse learning need, then what the school will develop based on the adding the coding criteria is an individualized program plan. And most of you are probably aware of these. In Calgary Catholic, they call them learner support plans. In other school divisions, they call them different things. So really, it's a document that sets individualized goals for your child. And your child is measured against their goals and the growth that they make. It will also identify whatever assessments have occurred, what accommodations and supports your child needs, what the school is doing to provide for support, and hopefully some transition planning for the next year. And it's a working document. It's a document that is starts and begins, around September, October, some timeline variables. It's reviewed throughout the year and can be added to and changed. It is a working document, and generally your child, if identified in ECS or grade 1, it will continue as needed throughout their schooling. It's important that it does because Often, if children want to go on to post-secondary, a lot of that information is in the IPP. There could be updated assessments needed, those types of things. Really good document and not set in stone. Like I said, it's a working document. So Alberta Education has developed this individualized program planning. It was 2006, but it's a really extensive resource. So I've just copied and pasted some pieces out of that, which I'll show you. So there is chapter one. It's like this document's huge. It's about this big. It's working through the IPP process. So you can get this document actually on the Alberta Education website. And there's all sorts of wonderful things. There's specialized assessment data, identification of strengths and needs, which is always really important, goals and objectives, continued support, any medical information. Does the child need an EpiPen? Is there medication that's being taken? Some things that need to be watched for, and then planning for transition. There's all sorts of IPP templates, sample steps, the steps to follow. And on the next slide, which I love, is the second piece. It's encouraging parent involvement. So this is where you're involved in the development of your child's individualized program plan. Often you'll be asked, what are their strengths and needs? What are you hoping to get from this? Reviewing and revising. There's things that you'll take home before you sign. You might want to revise or add some things, and then planning for transition. So it's really important to get off to a good start. And there's some really good documents within here that schools can use and parents can use. Also, they're encouraging a student participation. This is often a little bit tricky with the little tiny people, but I think as children grow up, of course, their knowledge of themselves and their needs are important within, you know, age appropriateness and those types of things. Often a parent's decision, of course, but they do have a section in here of supporting student participation. A lot of the youth that I work with do become involved with their IPP and actually are quite involved, and some really don't want anything to do with it. So it depends on the person's needs, wants, how much they can tolerate, etc. But advocacy is a really important thing, and especially as children grow older. And then there's always, as there should be, it takes a village, creating a support network. The roles that I've had have often been what I call liaison roles. So I don't work for these folks. I don't work for these folks. I work for the children, and it's bringing everyone together and making sure there's a whole team of people that can support. So it's really important to build your teams for your children. That can be your specialists, the EAs, teachers, always involved as a principal, etc. Maybe your FSCD worker if you have one, maybe your FSCD therapeutic support folks. Like there's lots of people I think that need to be on your child's team. The last one is how to use classroom assessment, not the last one on this page, to support the IPP process. So looking at, current assessments, informal reading inventories, where are they currently reading at? Where do we want them to be reading at? Can they decode? Can they identify words? Are they having struggles with reading comprehension? Those types of things. So making sure you have some really good baseline data to start building the strategies and supports and goals and objectives. It sounds really large, which it is. It's quite a process, but it also is not as overwhelming as it sounds. Each of these are little booklets, and chapter 10 is a booklet, and it's getting off to a good start in early childhood services. Super important because when you first come into the system, the school system, it can be very daunting for people. There's so many terms, there's acronyms for things, there's coding criteria, there's therapeutic supports, there's a lot of people. So I think if you're have a little tiny person, it's really good to have a look at this, and um, there's some samples just to give you a sense of, okay, so this is maybe how my school division will somewhat come across that and start the process. And then you'll be well versed more yourselves too. But like I said, work as a team. Don't take too much on yourselves. And then, in my opinion, the most important part of any planning for children with diverse learning needs is on the next slide. It's really important whether your child is transitioning from ECS to grade 1 to grade 7 to grade 9, out of school, that transitions are planned. And also, if there's a transition between two different organizations, for example, your child's coming from a PUF provider going into the Calgary board, there are some really nice infrastructures built in for that transition. And I think it's just absolutely crucial that everyone understands what is happening and to be prepared. So a little child isn't sort of having to start over at every junction. That generally doesn't happen, but transition is so important and can't be emphasized enough. Within Alberta education, um, now most documents, school documents, confidential file school documents, are being electronically stored, so they're easier to transfer between school divisions. Somewhat, it's part of that information flow that's often been difficult. So keep everything within a binder or with some folders of your child's IPPs throughout the years, their report cards. So if something is not available, that you have copies of that. That type of information is important for everyone and important, I think, for your child to see their growth throughout the years. Okay, so now I know this is a lot of information, so my apologies, but I'm trying to provide you with the best sort of resources and tips within this short time frame. Early intervention. So the first link that I provided is program unit funding. The next is early childhood intervention, and then the early years. So let's look at the next slide on program unit funding. The children's link has a nice, very concise descriptor. So program unit funding, or you'll hear people say PUF, is a grant provided by Alberta Education to school authorities for children with developmental disabilities who require additional support beyond that offered in the regular ECS classroom. So your child can actually be identified at 2.5. PUF is available for a maximum of 3 years. Sorry, child must be between 2 years, 8 months, and 6 years as of September 1st. They must have been assessed and diagnosed with a severe disability or a language delay. And that's where you can look on that coding criteria to see. And it must be by a qualified professional, i.e., a developmental pediatrician, a pediatrician, speech language pathologist, registered psychologist, etc. They must be enrolled in a pre-K or kindergarten program. And then an application is filled out by an early childhood support provider on behalf of the family, and they provide it, the PUF application to Alberta Education. So what does PUF offer? It offers educational programs to children who qualify, um, and they access these services based on their individual needs. Program support will be adapted each year to address the child's program, and IPP will be developed. There are a few different ways that early childhood services provide PUF. Some are center-based, meaning they take place in a center or school setting. Some are home-based, which I'm not as familiar with, and some are community settings, preschools. Some take place in continuation of different settings. So there's more information on that little tiny here button, and there is large sections on the Alberta Education website for program unit funding. I'm a firm believer in early intervention for kids. So hopefully that is a little bit of information, whereas the PUF world is quite large and well supported in many areas. It can be confusing. The next resource was the Early Childhood Intervention Program. This is through Alberta Health Services. Early Childhood Intervention Program provides information, education, and support for families with infants and young children who have developmental delays or disabilities. So there's an overview there. Services, fantastic services through Alberta Health Services, parent resources, and related resources. Very good website. And the next one is just a resource called The Early Years, Healthy Parents, Healthy Children. So if you scroll down to the next, this is a really nice resource for the early years. And your baby's development is first for 2 to 6 months. Young babies, feeding young babies, everyday care, growing and learning together, health checkups, taking care of yourself, preventing injuries. And it touches on each of these throughout these developing years, and then goes on to the journey continues. Some of you're first-time parents. It's a real learning curve, and this is a really nice resource for the early years. And it's available at that website. Another good resource is the Learning Team. The Learning Team is a really nice handbook for parents that was created by educators, by parents, for people to ask the right questions. It's a handbook for parents. How do you navigate this difficult and very large system, but very supportive system? That's what the title looks like. And it's an older resource, but it's a very, very good resource. The next slide has the table of contents and the Learning Team. And it just touches on who are children. This is older terminology with special needs. Building the learning team, meeting children's diverse learning needs, supporting social and emotional growth, planning for transitions, resolving differences, which sometimes happens, and keeping informed. In the appendices, it has some very good things. It's got the School Act. It's got some family goal setting, some provincial parent groups, transition checklists, government agencies, and a glossary of special education terms because there are a lot of them. Another very good document was developed in 2004 and addended a few years later. It's called the Standards for Special Education. And within here, there's the standards. So it's access, informed consent, identification, assessment, specialized assessment, right of access to school records, and coordinated service. There's appropriateness, professional standards, parents' involvement, placement, IPPs, accountability, school board policies and procedures, reporting to parents, and then appeals, which generally doesn't happen, but it has happened. And then there's legislation under the School Act, which is also available within this very informative document. Hopefully, it doesn't really get to a lot of this. Hopefully, things can be worked out at the school level, but sometimes it's good to have these documents when things are challenging. So, as discussed and as I showed you earlier, here are the links for those websites. There's Learning Team, very good. I used to hand it out to all the parents that had children that had been identified with a learning need. There's the Standards for Special Education and then the amended June 2004 PDF. And I know some of these documents are old, but they're still very much in use. So I know that's an awful lot of information in a very short amount of time. Like I said before, my email address will be available for any more specific questions. This was a generic overview of some of the resources. Education within Alberta is different for often. It's got an overarching Alberta education, but there are, differences within school divisions. So I do encourage everyone to work with their teachers, their principals. Teachers go into teaching to help and support kids and families. And like I said, it's a really great community, can be a great community and a good support for all of you and your children on their education journey. Although this was specifically for Alberta education, there are similar documents in other provinces that can be accessed through their education. So BC Ministry of Education, etc., etc. I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your precious time with me, and I wish you all the best of luck on your school journey for your children. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. If you want to learn more about neurodevelopment and mental health and congenital heart disease, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram. We are called Strong Hearts, Growing Minds. In the post section of the YouTube channel, you can also find handouts on various topics, while our Instagram account will keep you updated on new upcoming workshops.